Recently, I was involved in a discussion over on Brago's channel concerning Whitebeard and how chapter 999 affected him. I gave a little speech on where I stood, and the response is kind of what you would expect.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Some agreed, many disagreed. Brago offered his wisdom and opinion based on the things I said, and it sparked an interesting conversation. It's been a few days since then, and I've spent time reflecting on the matter, as well as waiting for the Viz translation just to be sure nothing changed in the context of the scene that we were talking about. And part of the process for preparing for this video involved me going out and having a few discussions with my close friends, as well as looking at what people were saying from afar in order to gain some new perspectives. I wanted to be able to test in order to see if my original stance still had some merit to it. This video will serve as a follow-up and continuation of that discussion. I'll lay out all of the arguments that I can come up with and present them as cleanly as I think I can. For those that are interested, feel free to put your own thoughts into the comments section, and we'll see if there is some kind of middle ground that we can reach. Let's begin.
Goda cannot be judged without first seeing the end. To gain, something of equal value must be lost. That is One Piece's first law of setup chapters. In those days, I really believed that to be the world's one and only truth.
One of the lingering plot holes of the Oden flashback was the fact that allies in the outside world didn't act or appear to know information pertaining to Oden in the 20 years after his death. Oda made an effort to try and plug up some of the inconsistencies with his worldbuilding and character writing on that front, which is a good thing. However, I propose that the answer that he gave us is insufficient and unintentionally damaged the character of Whitebeard and by extension his crew. Whitebeard's defining character trait is the concept that his crew is his family and that he's willing to do anything for them. The people on his crew call him father, and he extends the olive branch of son to many individuals who fly beneath his flag. Whitebeard's dream growing up, if you recall in the last scenes before his death, showed that his treasure and most desired thing was a family, which is a contrast to what the average pirate desires, such as the One Piece or some sort of physical treasure or status.
ガキの頃から欲しかったものがある。
お、あるのか。教えてみろ。
家族。
家族。なんだそれ。
感謝している。
If you mess with Whitebeard's crew, then you are going to pay the price for doing so. This reputation of Whitebeard's crew is so extensive that other characters in the world of One Piece know of it. And many that have a history with Whitebeard repeat that creed. Take this excerpt from Buggy as an example. And if there's one thing Whitebeard doesn't forgive, it's the death of his crewmates, no matter what. That's the kind of man he is. This statement is drawn from Buggy's history and knowledge of Whitebeard, a person he has run into numerous times. And we've seen the Whitebeard pirates repeat this themselves to give it a little bit more credence. Oden was murdered by Kaido in cold blood, which sets the precedent that if there was ever any knowledge of this gained by Whitebeard and his crew, that there would be a problem. The writing within 999 contradicts this, but it does give an excuse as to why the Whitebeard pirates didn't take action. Okay. Fair enough. Let's take a look at the reasoning then. How many times have I told you, Ace, you know who used to be the 2nd Division commander before you and why the position was unfilled for so long? We only learned of Oden's death several years after it happened. We considered moving on Wano many times, but never did in the end. Could you imagine what would happen and how many people would lose their lives? Ace then tries to rebuke this by saying, "Then let me go on my own, I made a promise." In short, the Whitebeard pirates chose to do nothing because people would get killed in the process and things could get a little dicey. This doesn't add up no matter what angle I look at it from. Whitebeard challenged and fought against 2 of the 3 great powers at the same time in Marineford with just his crew and alliance of captains. and the force that he fought against at Marineford greatly exceeds anything he could have even potentially run into at Wano. Whitebeard, the Marines, and the citizens knew that the battle at Marineford was going to happen, and they also knew that there would be casualties. He's an old-fashioned dinosaur. Do you really think you can beat the Navy? No matter who wins, a lot of people are going to die. If he's wise, he won't show. What's the life of one pirate against those of so many? On the island of Marineford, where the Navy headquarters is located, there is a large town inhabited mostly by the families of Navy personnel. The citizens have been evacuated. If you're coming with me, kiss your lives goodbye. Whitebeard is not afraid of the cost to maintain the values within his crew. Neither are the people in his crew. From fodder to named characters, everybody was willing to put their lives on the line in order to try and rescue Ace. Heading into Marineford, Whitebeard also knew that he wasn't coming out. Not only was Whitebeard aware of the consequences of the lives of his family that could be in danger, he was also aware of what was going to happen once his presence in the world vanished. All of the islands and all of the peoples that Whitebeard has helped protect over the decades would be thrown into chaos. The balance of the world would shift. There would be a huge section of the sea made vulnerable, and that would mean that the lives of regular people would hang in the balance, and Whitebeard was willing to take this risk. What then are the rebuttals you'll see people use when it comes to this topic about Whitebeard and his character? I've compiled a list of all of the ones I think are relevant, and we'll just go over them. One argument that is used is that the Whitebeard pirates weren't afraid of what would happen to themselves, but were more concerned over the well-being of the citizens of Wano and the potential backlash that a war would cause. There are a few reasons why this doesn't hold up as a valid statement in my eyes. One, the context of the chapter suggests that the lives of the crew are what is being discussed when it comes to the potential loss of life. When Marco brings up the idea of death, Ace says that he'll go himself so as to work around the number of lives. They don't mention the citizens directly. 2. If you include the citizens as a concern, the complexity and lore of One Piece do not play into this being a valid reason for inaction. It does not take into account the resources and information available to Whitebeard. Ace, at the time of his return, indicated that Kaido was not at Wano and neither were his strongest subordinates. This is important information. It means that Kaido isn't always holed up in one location like we assumed Big Mom was. The Whitebeard pirates could have gone into Wano, easily liberated during one of Kaido's absences, and secured the safety of its people without even fighting Kaido himself. With Whitebeard's fleet, he could have grabbed the entire population of Wano and moved them elsewhere if he really wanted to. But let's suppose that Kaido leaving at the time Ace got there was a one-time thing, and that by the time that Ace made it back to Whitebeard to report what he saw, Kaido had already returned to Wano, and he didn't leave again until the current point in the story, which is hard to say, but let's just assume that's the case. There are still options available in order to tackle the situation. The very lore of Kaido and his character can be used. When Kaido was introduced at the end of chapter 795, the following was stated by the narrator. To speak more on this man, he had tasted defeat as a pirate on 7 occasions, and he had been caught by the Navy or enemy ships no less than 18 times. To repeat, this is a man who challenged the Navy and the 4 emperors. Kaido was known, in his very lore, to go out of his way to put himself into precarious situations because his hobby is suicide, and he has directly challenged Whitebeard in the past. Kaido has also been defeated numerous times. The Whitebeard pirates, if they wanted to avoid the citizens, could fight and defeat Kaido without ever having to go into Wano, because Kaido himself is looking for a fight. If Whitebeard initiated a challenge in anger due to what happened to Oden, Kaido would accept. Choosing to do nothing out of fear for casualties doesn't stop the casualties that are already happening in the tyranny that is Wano. Ace was there, he witnessed things firsthand, he knows that the country is in shambles. Because Whitebeard let Thatch go, it makes sense why he let Oden go as well. Thatch sets a trend for Whitebeard doing this, so it's still within his character. The situations surrounding Thatch and Oden are not the same. The story makes this clear. Thatch was an exception due to the extremely odd nature of his death and who did it. Whitebeard wanted Ace to let the rules of the ship go because Whitebeard was getting a bad feeling about Blackbeard, the person. Blackbeard had been aboard the ship for decades, as we know. He joined Whitebeard's crew when he was just a kid, and for years acted completely normal. He did as he was told. He hid behind the shadow that was Whitebeard. No one suspected anything. Blackbeard states himself that had he never found the Yama Yama no Mi, he would have just given up on his dream, which would then leave you to believe that he might have served the rest of his life aboard Whitebeard's ship or left it to go do something else. Whitebeard knew that Teach was a D as well. He received information from Roger during their last meetings as to what the D meant. All of this subcontext lends itself to Blackbeard's situation being weird. Whitebeard even tells Ace, "Let it go this time." This phrase implies that similar situations were not given this treatment before. There is no mention of Oden, a second commander, or anything to tie these situations to each other to make the reasonings co-align. It can't be an exception if it hasn't happened before. And it's more than likely the case that at the time that this situation with Ace and Whitebeard was being written, Oda hadn't even thought of all the events that would happen in Oden's life in Wano, which is important to point out because that makes it harder to connect it to the story at large. The situation with Oden cannot have happened and not been referenced during the Thatch situation if you want to try and counter-argue this point. The fact is, there was no effort to connect these circumstances within the narrative, and this goes back to the original reason for why Whitebeard didn't act. In the Thatch situation, Whitebeard thought something was fishy with Blackbeard, whereas with Oden, it had nothing to do with any of the characters involved. The reason stated was that it would cause casualties. These are different matters, and it's because of the reason stated in the chapter that makes the excuse given bad. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, counter-arguments used in this discussion is stating that Whitebeard went to save Ace and Marineford because he was still alive. Oden is dead, so therefore it makes less sense to endanger yourself and others in the process. I disagree with this, and I'll explain why. But for the sake of discussion, let's assume, once again, that this is true. Let's say that Whitebeard only went to Marineford because Ace was alive and he could be saved. Does that still mean Whitebeard wouldn't have gone to Wano or intervened in some way? What about Oden's family? Oden traveled with Whitebeard for a while. He met Toki because of Whitebeard. Toki gave birth to Momonosuke on Whitebeard's ship. They were partially raised by the Whitebeard pirates. If Oden is dead, what about his family? Does Whitebeard not care about them? In Marineford, after learning Luffy was Ace's brother, and that he was spearheading a front to get Ace, Whitebeard used this moment to protect Luffy to rally the crew. And Whitebeard's subordinates, who are instruments of his ideology, yelled out, "Protect Ace's brother. Ace's family is our family." Whitebeard, without a doubt, would have went to save them. Now let's say that Whitebeard learned that Toki, Momonosuke, Hiyori, and all of the scabbards were presumed dead. What then? Doesn't that make things kind of infinitely worse? When Roger asked Whitebeard if it was okay to borrow Oden just for a year, Whitebeard became furious, shouting, "Absolutely not, Roger. Are you trying to steal my family away from me?" The result of even the implication of his family being stolen from him made Whitebeard so angry that he started shifting the seas. If Whitebeard learned that not only did Oden die, but his entire family and all of his followers, that is the equivalent of having a large portion of your family stolen and then slaughtered. That's not enough?
Okay.
Then what about Izo? Izo was and is a member of Whitebeard's crew who left his blood brother back in Wano. When Izo found out the news of Oden's death, was he not concerned about the well-being of his brother? How didn't this play a factor in his own actions, let alone Whitebeard's? Wouldn't Whitebeard want to act in order to help Izo, a trusted and loved member of his crew? Or is that simply another death that Whitebeard is willing to allow? Even after Whitebeard passed away, where was Izo? What was he doing? Why did he need to be dragged to Wano in order for him to start caring? I think this speaks for itself. Now let's head back to the discussion of the importance of Ace and Oden being alive versus being dead. Every argument that we are going to come across in this video needs to be able to survive what the story has laid out with its foundations. What was the reason given for why they didn't want to go to Wano to avenge Oden again? That's right, because people would get hurt, not because Oden was dead. The Whitebeard pirates even state that they debated going to Wano numerous times. It's not that they never thought of doing it. They thought about it a lot. Oden being alive or dead didn't factor into the conversation, and we have evidence from the story to support this. Let's head back for a moment to Impel Down, while Ace was chained up. Garp comes to visit him. Ace asks Garp to kill him. Ace knows that Whitebeard is coming. He knows Whitebeard too well, and he is afraid of people putting their lives on the line in order to rescue him. That's one of the core things going on with Ace's character during Marineford. In desperation, he thought that if Garp killed him while he was still in prison, that it would change something. This sort of desperate thinking is something that Ace does a variety of times, and he does it again during Marineford when he tries to talk the Whitebeard pirates out of helping him when they were already showed up. Garp has intimate experience with Whitebeard, similar but probably to a lesser extent to how he knows Roger's character by heart. In response to Ace's request, Garp says the following: "Kill you? Don't be rash, you fool. There's nothing you can do now. Whitebeard won't stop if you die. Nothing can prevent this war now. We've angered the king of the sea." Ace puts his head down in frustration. He knows Garp is right. And if there's one thing Whitebeard doesn't forgive, it's the death of his crewmates. Buggy and Garp are correct and understand Whitebeard's character. Whitebeard would have avenged Oden regardless of him being dead or not. Here we have yet another argument that people use. They say that Oden made his decisions on his own, and that Whitebeard wouldn't have acted because he respected Oden as a man, and he would let him suffer the consequences of his actions. This argument is a desperate extrapolation and attempt at justifying the current story rather than seeing the truth. This exact excuse was used by Ace at Marineford, and it didn't work. Let's go back and you'll see. As soon as Whitebeard and the Alliances show up to Marineford, Ace screams out, "Pops, I ignored your warnings and went off on my own, so why can't you just abandon me to my fate? I brought this on myself." Whitebeard counters this by saying, "No, I sent you on that mission, my son." Ace is confused, and he continues by saying, "That's not true. Stop talking nonsense. You tried to stop me, but I..." And Whitebeard doesn't care what Ace has to say. He continues talking to Marco. "I ordered him to go. Right, Marco?" "That's right. I heard you. Sorry you've had such a rough time, Ace. But everybody in these waters should know better than to mess with one of our crew. Anyone who lays a hand on one of us has to suffer the consequences. We'll make sure those responsible pay for it, Ace." Whitebeard and his allies don't care that Ace did this to himself. They take responsibility regardless. Whitebeard believes that it's incumbent upon himself and his crew to do something, and they did it, even if it meant taking on the world. Oden going off on his own adventure means little in the face of Whitebeard's love. What's the life of one pirate against those of so many? The answer? Everything. This is a funny one. Because Oden left Whitebeard's crew to journey with Roger for a little bit, that means Whitebeard doesn't care about what happens to him, and therefore doesn't mean he would go to avenge him. If you are someone who believes this, I don't think you know how insulting this is to Whitebeard's character. Need I remind you that Whitebeard cared about Oden so much, called him a brother, that after Oden left Whitebeard's crew, Whitebeard had the 2nd Division Commander spot vacant, in a hope that Oden would come back. And even after Oden's death, he still left it vacant. Oden asked Whitebeard for permission to join the Roger Pirates, and yes, Whitebeard was angry in the moment because he was losing a family member. But when Roger gave gold and food to Whitebeard in exchange for Oden, Whitebeard was even angrier at the thought of Oden and his family not having food. So he forced his crew to return that food back to the Roger Pirates. Oh, isn't that interesting? That reinforces the idea that Whitebeard cared about Oden's family. Once again, this argument fails to pass the criteria we laid out. The Whitebeard pirates did in fact think about heading to Wano for revenge. Oden leaving the crew didn't matter. This is an interesting discussion point that was brought up by Brago when I presented him with some of the panels that I've showed you, such as the Garp one. The response that I received to account for this evidence was that Garp didn't know the current Whitebeard. His interpretation is from the Whitebeard he knew in the past. Brago brought up that an underlying theme within Marineford is the fact that people thought a lot of Whitebeard and still assumed him to be as strong as he was in the past. But the reality was, he was an old man. And this is right. This analysis is correct. Whitebeard prior to the war was hyped up to be the current strongest man in the world. That he was just as strong as he was in the past and age hadn't affected him. But as we came to learn throughout the arc, Whitebeard is in fact old. His strength somewhat diminished. His illness taking more and more of a toll on him. Whitebeard is shown to acknowledge this mentally and in his conversation with Crocodile, because Crocodile became angry at Whitebeard's lack of resilience. No one can be the strongest for forever. I didn't have an immediate comeback to the statement in the stream, and I thought it was something that might be a good excuse. Having given it some thought, I think that even this great argument is not good enough to account for the story and the events within 999. I know Brago is making his own video on this topic, so perhaps he'll have more to say about this, and I plan on watching that. But I laid out the context of the scene between Garp and Ace earlier, and I think it's clear that even Ace thinks Garp is right when it comes to whether Whitebeard would act if he died. Whitebeard isn't the same physical specimen he was in the past, but he's the same person. His morals and character were reinforced as opposed to being taken down in Marineford, and there was even an attempt to take down his character in the arc. That's where Squadro comes into play. Sengoku, who knows that Whitebeard values his family, set up a devious plot to have Akainu feed false information to Squadro, who has insecurities due to the fact that his crew was defeated by the Raja pirates. Akainu tells Squadro that Whitebeard created a deal with the world government that would allow Ace to survive at the cost of everyone else. Squadro is led to believe that Ace means much more to him than any of his other children. Whitebeard was playing favorites, and he was willing to sacrifice it all for him, which is something that realistically, if that was the case, could have worked if Whitebeard had wanted it to. Whitebeard could have even traded himself in 1-for-1 for Ace's life, and it probably would have worked. The conflict inside of Squadro boils up, which is what leads him to impale Whitebeard through the chest with a sword. In chapter 563, entitled One Man, One Heart, Whitebeard shows his true character. Many of the Whitebeard Alliance captains, having heard Squadro's speech, begin to question Whitebeard's character. Even the people in Saba Odi are questioning it. But despite being stabbed, despite the questioning, Whitebeard forgives Squadro. You may be a fool, but I still love you. I know how much you hate Gold Roger, but it's wrong to condemn a child for the sins of his father. What did Ace ever do to you? Be good to each other. Ace isn't the only one who's special to me. I love all my children. Angered that anyone would even question the love he has for his family, Whitebeard creates an escape for those who want to leave and commands those who are still with him to fight and die with him. Whitebeard is one man, but he's had the same heart for forever, baby. The idea of favoritism being used to try and make it seem like Whitebeard is only doing this for Ace is a bit flawed for me. And yes, Whitebeard loves Ace a great deal, but it's not only Ace who would receive this sort of treatment. Whitebeard loved Oden, and it took someone of Ace's caliber to arrive before the figurative hole in Whitebeard's heart healed, and he allowed someone to become the second commander. Whitebeard went out of his way in order to risk it all for Ace. Why wouldn't he do the same for the person whose spot was there to begin with? Even in death, Whitebeard loved Oden so much that he would act. A last-ditch effort to come up with an excuse for the increasingly apparent lack of sound writing is the assumption that Whitebeard knew about the prophecy and chose to do nothing, as well as assuming that Whitebeard was afraid of Kaido, or didn't believe himself to be strong enough to defeat him. Once again, like so many arguments before, this fails to be represented within the story. Neither of these are reasons that are stated in the chapter, nor are they implied reasons. There is no indication of either point being relevant. And even if they were, it still doesn't make sense. When Oden returned to Wano, he didn't intend to die. That wasn't a part of his plan. He wanted to prepare the borders of Wano for the Child of Destiny. Had Whitebeard known about the prophecy, and maybe he did, the one that Toki told the people of Wano, and then still chose to do nothing, letting an entire country suffer, its people die, and tragedy to pile up, is absolutely idiotic and not representative at all of Whitebeard. Then you have the alternative of deducing that Whitebeard didn't think he could defeat Kaido. Even in his declining age, Whitebeard thinking he couldn't win doesn't mean he wouldn't take action. As usual though, let's assume that this argument is true. Old Beard didn't think he could beat Kaido. Well, the Whitebeard pirates learned of Oden's death several years after it happened, meaning that at the point in time that Whitebeard learned of this, he was significantly younger than what he was portrayed to be back in Marineford. Remember, the context of the scene with Ace. The Whitebeard pirates are telling Ace that they already knew Oden was dead. Ace did not reveal this to them. The word several is typically used as a marker for a number, right? It's more than 2, but less than a decade. Stereotypically, it's the marker for the number 4. You can debate on what the word several means to you, but Whitebeard, regardless of how you spin it, would have been around the age of 58 to 62, give or take a few years in either direction, depending upon how you define the word. There is no debate that Primebeard is stronger than Kaido. We don't know when Whitebeard started leaving his prime, but the Whitebeard that first found out about Oden's death was closer to his prime than at any other point in the series. Whitebeard, in his old age, still decided to go and challenge the world government and the warlords. He would have challenged Kaido as well. To add salt to the wound, Whitebeard also had time on his side to create plans in order to do something. This is sort of the catch-22 with one of the things that we criticize Oden for in the Oden flashback. Whitebeard had over a decade of planning and chose to do nothing. There is no theme of forgetting pain and living on with what you have to account for this lack of action as well. So let's just ask ourselves the question at the end of the day. Does it make sense to try and extrapolate reasons from the story that aren't told to us or hinted at in order to justify what we are seeing? Or is it more likely that Oda just messed up? I think the structure of Wano in chapter 999 shows you what Oda's intent was. Oda is wrapping up and marking off boxes on his sheet of things he needs to address before Wano is over. Show a little bit of Yamato meeting Ace, check. Speedrun all of the subplots for the Straw Hats within Onigashima and then have them not matter, check. Speedrun Tama finding out about Ace, and I guess you could throw Momo in there as well, check. Create something to show that Whitebeard didn't do anything, check. The subplot of Marco even being in Wano is something that we've kind of been scratching our heads at anyway. Remember, now, that Marco gave a letter to Nekomushi and told him that he wasn't coming. But in the letter, it said he was coming, and he showed up at the exact same time as everyone else. Marco also said he didn't know how bad things had gotten, even though he was fed information by Ace years prior. Marco doesn't really even have much of a place within Wano currently as far as his motivations go, invalidating what Oda set up previously. The result of this writing inevitably paints Whitebeard in a negative light. The focus of the scenes revealing the reasonings for Whitebeard pirates that we've gone over numerous times in this video, they don't connect to a subplot or plot line that can lead you to the conclusion that Oda is trying to add nuance to Whitebeard's character. People mistake character writing for a flaw in the writing. They aren't the same. If Whitebeard was a flawed character, I wouldn't be complaining. It is the way that it's written that creates an unrealistic flaw that isn't backed up by the story. Now, that doesn't mean that more can't be added to what we're talking about here to account for all the things that we discussed. Perhaps in a few chapters, or maybe somewhere down the line, Oda gives us more information and he pastes up all of the holes. Great. I have nothing to say then. But that hasn't happened yet. Until the day that does happen, and I don't think it will, the conclusion that I think must be reached is that Whitebeard's character took a hit as a result of the writing. But you're free to comment your own thoughts. And until next time, have a nice day.